Clara Hayes wasn't the kind of woman who asked for sympathy. From the outside, people saw a confident, polished professional, someone who walked into her office building every morning with her head held high, heels clicking against the marble floor, her files neatly tucked under one arm, and her warm smile hiding just how much she carried on her shoulders. But behind that smile was the daily reality of a single mother doing everything she could to hold her world together. Clara worked as a corporate consultant at a mid-sized firm in Chicago. Her clients knew her for her razor-sharp insights. Her colleagues admired her for her resilience, but very few people truly knew the sacrifices she made once the office lights dimmed and the briefcases closed for the night. At home, her world was Ethan, her 8-year-old son. A boy with bright brown eyes, a smile that could light up even the hardest day, and a heart full of dreams. Ethan wanted to be everything at once: a scientist, a soccer player, maybe even a writer someday. Clara was determined to make sure he believed he could. Every morning, the same routine played out. Clara would wake up before dawn, quietly packing Ethan's lunch while the coffee brewed. She'd check her phone for early client emails, balancing a frying pan in one hand and typing with the other. By the time Ethan padded into the kitchen with messy hair and sleepy eyes, his breakfast was already on the table and his backpack ready by the door. She wasn't just his mom, she was his rock, his safe place, his #1 cheerleader. But truth be told, the weight of it all sometimes felt unbearable. The late nights when Ethan had homework but she still had presentations to prepare. The weekends when other families had 2 parents at the soccer field, and Ethan had only her, cheering as loud as 2 voices combined. Still, Clara never let Ethan see her cracks. She wanted him to know strength, not struggle. She wanted him to see possibility, not pressure. And so, every day, she pushed forward, grateful for what she had, determined to give her son more, but quietly wondering how much longer she could keep carrying everything on her own. What Clara didn't know was that her path was about to collide with someone she least expected. Someone whose life couldn't be more different from hers. A man with more power than she could imagine, and yet, more emptiness in his heart than she could ever guess. And it all started with a chance encounter that would change their lives forever. Because little did Clara know, while she was juggling spreadsheets and soccer games, fate was quietly weaving her into the path of a billionaire CEO. And the first spark of that connection would begin with her son, Ethan. Life has a funny way of bringing people together when they least expect it. For Clara Hayes, that moment came on an evening when she had no plans to stand out, no reason to be noticed, and every intention of blending into the background. Her company had been invited to a high-profile industry networking event, the kind filled with glass walls, crystal chandeliers, and people sipping champagne while talking about numbers that could make or break entire corporations. Clara never felt fully at home at these kinds of events. To her, they were just another part of the job. But that night, she didn't realize her very presence would catch the eye of someone who rarely noticed anyone at all. That someone was Alexander Knight. Alexander was the kind of man everyone in the room recognized instantly. A billionaire CEO whose reputation preceded him, sharp, commanding, and feared in the business world for his ruthless decisions. He wasn't the type to linger in small talk or be impressed by flattery. To him, most people either wanted something from him or were too intimidated to speak honestly. But when Alexander's eyes landed on Clara, something shifted. He noticed the way she held herself, poised, intelligent, not seeking attention but commanding it in her quiet way. When she spoke in her small circle of colleagues, she didn't try to impress. She simply stated her thoughts with clarity and confidence. For a man used to endless flattery, her authenticity was refreshing. Alexander didn't approach her that night. He simply observed, filing her presence away in the back of his mind. But fate wasn't done weaving their story together. A week later, Clara and Ethan had gone to a quiet local bookstore cafe, their favorite weekend spot. Clara was browsing the shelves, searching for a new book Ethan might enjoy, when it happened. Ethan, always curious and full of energy, darted around the corner too quickly and bumped straight into a tall man holding a cup of coffee. The drink nearly spilled, but instead of anger, the man looked down and found himself staring into the wide, apologetic eyes of a little boy. "Sorry, mister," Ethan blurted, his small voice carrying both nervousness and charm. Alexander Knight blinked, surprised. He wasn't used to being spoken to so directly by children. Most people, young or old, usually looked at him with hesitation. But this boy's honesty disarmed him. "It's all right," Alexander said, his tone softer than usual. "You're quick on your feet. You must be fast on the soccer field, huh?" Ethan's face lit up. "You play soccer too?" Alexander chuckled. "I used to. Not as good as I imagine you are." The conversation unfolded naturally, something rare for Alexander. Within minutes, he found himself genuinely enjoying the boy's honesty, his eagerness, and the way he spoke without fear or pretense. And then Clara appeared, rounding the corner to see her son chatting away with a stranger. But when her eyes landed on the man, her heart skipped a beat. She recognized him instantly. Alexander Knight. Her first instinct was to pull Ethan back. "Ethan, let's not bother the gentleman," she said politely, her professional mask slipping into place. But Alexander's gaze lingered on her, that faint spark of recognition flashing across his eyes. In that moment, Clara had no idea that this accidental collision, one cup of coffee, one curious little boy, was the first thread tying her life to a man she thought lived in a completely different world. Because Alexander Knight wasn't the kind of man who let curiosity slip away. And as much as Clara wanted to keep her distance, she was about to discover that he wasn't done noticing her. Not by a long shot. For most people, a chance encounter in a bookstore cafe might fade into memory. But for Alexander Knight, that moment with Clara and Ethan refused to leave his mind. He kept replaying it, Ethan's openness, Clara's composed but guarded presence, the way she spoke to him with politeness but without awe. It was different. And Alexander wasn't a man used to being treated like just another person. Days later, at another corporate gathering, their paths crossed again. This time, it wasn't by accident, it was through business. Clara was representing her firm in a panel discussion on market strategies. The room was filled with executives eager to impress, but when Clara spoke, she didn't recite buzzwords or hide behind jargon. She spoke with conviction, backed by facts, and laced with a clarity that made even the most complicated ideas easy to understand. Alexander found himself leaning in, listening closely. Unlike the dozens of polished professionals he encountered daily, Clara wasn't trying to sell herself. She was simply standing in her truth. And that truth fascinated him. When the panel ended, Alexander approached her. "You have an interesting way of breaking down complex problems," he remarked. Clara, caught slightly off guard, gave a polite nod. "I just say what I believe will actually work. No point in dressing it up." Her tone wasn't dismissive, but it wasn't reverent either. And that subtle balance, respect without fear, confidence without arrogance, stood out to Alexander. In the days that followed, he began noticing her more often. At industry events, at boardrooms where their company's work intersected, even in the way her name circulated among executives who admired her ability to deliver results under pressure. But it wasn't just the professional admiration that drew him. No, what captured Alexander's attention most was her strength as a mother. One afternoon, as fate would have it, he spotted her leaving her office building. Clara walked briskly, juggling her phone in one hand while guiding Ethan with the other. She didn't notice Alexander watching from across the street. He saw how her serious expression softened instantly when Ethan spoke, how she bent down to listen to him, giving him her full attention despite the chaos of her day. Alexander realized something startling. Clara wasn't impressed by him. She wasn't chasing him. She wasn't playing games. She was simply living her life, working hard, loving her son, and standing on her own 2 feet. And for a man who had built his empire behind walls of control and dominance, seeing that kind of independence stirred something deep within him. But fascination alone wasn't enough. The real shift began when his bond with Ethan grew stronger. A connection that would begin to weave their worlds together in ways Clara could no longer ignore. Because as much as Clara tried to keep her life separate, Alexander wasn't just intrigued anymore. He was about to step into Ethan's world, and in doing so, right into hers. For weeks, Clara tried to convince herself that the bookstore run-in and the panel conversation were nothing more than coincidences. She told herself that Alexander Knight was just another powerful name in a world she brushed against professionally, not someone who would ever truly intersect with her personal life. But fate once again had other plans. It started small. One Saturday morning, Ethan was scheduled for his soccer game at a local park. Clara rushed through her usual routine, packing snacks, folding his jersey, lacing up his cleats while juggling her phone with one hand as a work email pinged in. That morning, the field was buzzing with kids laughing, parents chatting, whistles blowing. Clara stood at the sidelines, cheering with the same enthusiasm she always did, her voice carrying across the field for Ethan to hear. And then, she noticed someone standing a little apart from the crowd. Tall, dressed simply but unmistakably, watching with interest. Alexander. At first, she thought she must have been imagining it. What was a billionaire CEO doing at a small neighborhood soccer field? But when Ethan spotted him, his face broke into the widest grin. He waved enthusiastically and shouted, "Mr. Knight, you came." Clara's heart sank. Ethan remembered him. Not just remembered, he adored him. Alexander walked over casually, nodding toward Clara with a polite smile. "I was in the area," he explained. But something in his tone told Clara this wasn't an accident. Throughout the game, Alexander stood right there with the parents, cheering Ethan on. And when Ethan scored his very first goal, Alexander's clap was the loudest of them all. The look of pride in his eyes wasn't feigned, it was real. From that day forward, little moments kept pulling him deeper into Ethan's world. A quick chess game at the cafe where Clara and Ethan often stopped after school. Helping Ethan with a tricky math problem while Clara grabbed them hot chocolate. Even listening intently as Ethan rambled about his dream to build a rocket one day. Each time, Clara told herself she needed to draw boundaries. Alexander was not family. He wasn't even a friend. To Alexander Knight, a man whose life was galaxies away from hers. But as she watched him kneel down to Ethan's level, listening without distraction, laughing with genuine joy, she couldn't deny what she saw. Alexander wasn't trying to impress her. He wasn't showing off his wealth or his influence. He was simply being present. And that was something even some fathers failed to do. Still, Clara's instinct screamed caution. She knew how unpredictable life could be, and she had spent years building a safe, stable world for Ethan. Letting someone like Alexander in, someone who had the power to disrupt everything, felt like stepping onto dangerous ground. Yet, no matter how hard she tried to resist, the bond between Alexander and Ethan was growing. And Clara was about to face a challenge in her own career that would test not only her strength, but also force her to decide whether she could let Alexander truly stand beside her. Because just when Clara thought she had control over her life, a storm was brewing at her company, one that could destroy everything she had worked for. And this time, walking alone might no longer be enough. Clara had always believed that her greatest battles were at home, late nights balancing spreadsheets after putting Ethan to bed, early mornings running on coffee and determination. But nothing could have prepared her for the storm that hit her company. It started with whispers, a sudden drop in stock value, meetings behind closed doors that excluded most of the team. And then, the truth became impossible to ignore. Clara's company was facing a hostile takeover. For years, she had poured her expertise into helping the firm grow, building trust with her colleagues, and ensuring the work they produced wasn't just profitable but meaningful. Now, all of it was at risk of being swallowed whole by a larger corporation that cared nothing for the employees, the culture, or the years of dedication people had put into their work. The board was panicking. Some executives were ready to sell out, take the money and run. Others froze, unable to see past the looming threat. But Clara couldn't accept that. She knew the company's true worth. She knew the people who had worked overtime, who had sacrificed weekends, who had believed in the mission. And she refused to let it all crumble. One night, sitting at her kitchen table with documents spread out everywhere, she rubbed her temples in exhaustion. Ethan peeked out from his room. "Mom, are you okay?" he asked softly. She forced a smile. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just a lot of work." But she wasn't fine. She was scared, because for the first time in years, Clara wasn't sure if her strength would be enough. That's when Alexander stepped in. He had caught wind of the takeover through his own network of contacts. After all, nothing in the corporate world escaped him for long. When he learned that Clara was in the middle of it, he showed up at her office late one evening, finding her still at her desk, buried under stacks of paperwork. "You don't have to do this alone," he said firmly, placing a folder on her desk. Inside were resources, connections, and strategies that could turn the tide. Clara looked up, her defenses rising instantly. "I appreciate it, Alexander, but this is my fight. I can't just lean on you to fix it." He didn't flinch. "I'm not here to take over, Clara. I'm here to stand beside you. There's a difference." His words lingered. She wanted to believe him, but every part of her screamed caution. She had built her life on independence, on proving that she could stand strong without anyone swooping in to rescue her. So she pushed his help away. For now. But as the crisis deepened, the weight grew unbearable. Meetings turned hostile, deadlines suffocated her, and the fear of failure loomed larger every day. Clara was beginning to realize that maybe, just maybe, she couldn't hold up the sky by herself this time. Because as much as Clara wanted to stand alone, she was about to discover the true meaning of partnership. And the man she thought was only a ruthless who was about to show her a side of himself she never imagined. The pressure was unbearable. Every day, Clara walked into the office feeling the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders. The hostile takeover wasn't slowing down, it was accelerating. Meetings became battles, co-workers whispered about their futures, and the board grew more divided with every passing hour. Clara had built her career on solving problems, but this wasn't just numbers on a spreadsheet. This was about people's livelihoods. And for the first time, she wondered if all her strength might not be enough. One evening, after yet another grueling day, Clara sat in the conference room long after everyone had left. Papers were scattered, her laptop screen glowed faintly, and her hands trembled as she scrolled through projections that painted a grim picture. She buried her face in her hands, fighting back tears. She couldn't show weakness, not here, not now. But then the door opened. Alexander Knight stepped inside. Not in his usual commanding suit, but in a simple shirt and jacket. His presence filled the room, but this time, it wasn't intimidating. It was steady, grounded. "You've been at this all night," he said quietly. "Clara, you can't keep burning yourself out like this." She looked up sharply. "I don't have a choice, Alexander. People are counting on me. If I fall apart, they lose everything." He walked closer, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "You think strength means carrying it all alone. But real strength is knowing when to let someone stand beside you." Clara shook her head. "I can't let you take over. I won't be another person who hides behind your power." Alexander sat across from her, meeting her gaze evenly. "I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to trust me, to let me help, not control. You lead this fight. I'll follow your lead." For a long moment, Clara said nothing. She had spent years proving to herself, to the world, that she could survive on her own. Accepting help felt like admitting defeat. But looking at Alexander, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, the vulnerability he wasn't used to showing, she realized something. This wasn't about her failing. This was about building something stronger. Slowly, she nodded. "All right, but we do this my way. Together." A small smile tugged at Alexander's lips. "Together," he repeated. In the weeks that followed, Clara and Alexander became an unexpected team. He opened doors she couldn't, connecting her to people who could rally against the takeover. She crafted the strategies, her expertise shining through, while Alexander stood firmly at her side, backing her every decision. And in those late nights working together, the walls between them began to crumble. Clara saw a side of Alexander few ever glimpsed. The boy who had grown up lonely, the young man who had built his empire by shutting everyone out, the human being behind the powerful name. And Alexander saw Clara not just as a brilliant consultant or a strong mother, but as a woman who embodied resilience, integrity, and heart, the very things he'd been missing in his own life. But what neither of them realized yet was that this battle for the company wasn't just about saving jobs. It was about redefining what love and partnership truly meant. Because once the dust settled, Alexander would have to decide if he was willing to let go of the only life he'd ever known, for the love he never thought he'd find. The weeks that followed felt like a storm finally breaking into calm. With Clara's sharp strategies and Alexander's connections, the hostile takeover attempt slowly began to collapse. One by one, the pieces shifted back into place. Investors who had nearly given up regained confidence. Employees who had been packing their desks began to hope again. And the board, once divided, stood behind Clara's leadership. When the crisis ended, Clara wasn't celebrated as a victim who had been saved. She was honored as the woman who had saved the company. And Alexander never once tried to steal the spotlight. He stood quietly in the background, proud to watch her shine. But the victory was more than just corporate. Something deeper had happened between them. Alexander had begun to see life in a way he never had before. For so long, his world had been measured in numbers, deals, and control. But Clara showed him something different. That true power wasn't about dominating, it was about building. That true wealth wasn't measured in money, but in moments that mattered. And then there was Ethan. The boy who had once been just a curious stranger at a bookstore was now the bridge Alexander didn't even know he needed. Ethan adored him, challenging him to chess games, inviting him to school events, and pulling him into their little traditions. And slowly, Alexander found himself softening in ways he never imagined possible. One evening, after dinner at Clara's modest apartment, Ethan tugged on Alexander's sleeve. "Do you think you could come to my soccer practice again? You cheer louder than anyone else," Ethan grinned. Alexander laughed, ruffling his hair. "Louder than your mom?" Ethan giggled. "Okay, maybe not louder, but close." Clara watched the exchange from the kitchen, her heart tightening in her chest. She had been so careful to guard her son from disappointment, so protective of his little world. Yet here was Alexander, a man with every reason to keep his distance, kneeling on her worn living room rug, playing board games and laughing like he'd belonged there all along. It scared her, because letting Alexander in meant risking everything. And yet, she couldn't deny what she saw, a man who wasn't just falling for her, but who was also falling for Ethan and Ethan for him. Still, the question lingered. Was Alexander truly ready to let go of his old life for this new one? Could a billionaire CEO, so used to power, prestige, and control, truly find happiness in something as simple as love, family, and belonging? Because Clara was about to find out. And the answer wouldn't come in a boardroom, or in a deal, or with grand displays of wealth. It would come in the most unexpected way. For Clara, life had always been about balance, between work and motherhood, between sacrifice and strength, between holding on and letting go. But now, with Alexander in her life, the balance felt different. It felt possible. The company crisis was finally behind her. Her career was stronger than ever, her colleagues respected her leadership, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to breathe. But while she had conquered the boardroom, there was still one place she was terrified of failing: at home. Ethan had a school presentation coming up, a simple classroom event where parents were invited to watch their children share their projects. Clara had promised she would be there, but as the day drew closer, an emergency client meeting landed on her calendar. She tried everything to move it, but the timing was brutal. On the morning of the presentation, Clara dressed quickly, her heart torn in two. She kissed Ethan's forehead and whispered, "I'll be there, I promise." But deep down, she feared the worst, that she'd let her son down again. The day unfolded in a blur of conference calls, negotiations, and frantic glances at the clock. By the time she wrapped up, she was already late. She raced across town, praying she hadn't missed everything. Meanwhile, in Ethan's classroom, the teacher called his name. Ethan walked nervously to the front, clutching his project, small hands trembling, eyes scanning the doorway. His mom wasn't there. His smile faltered. But then, a familiar figure entered the room. Alexander. Not in a tailored suit, not with bodyguards or assistants. Just Alexander, sitting quietly in the back row, giving Ethan a small, reassuring nod. Ethan's face lit up instantly. With renewed confidence, he launched into his presentation. his voice steady, his excitement filling the room. And all the while, Alexander sat there, listening intently, clapping the loudest when Ethan finished. When Clara finally arrived, breathless and apologetic, she froze at the sight. Ethan wasn't disappointed. He was beaming, running up to her afterward, saying, "Mom, Mr. Knight came. He didn't let me down." Tears stung Clara's eyes. She turned to Alexander, their gazes meeting across the room. No words were needed. She understood. This wasn't about wealth, status, or power. This was about commitment, about showing up when it mattered most, about love that wasn't controlling, but supportive. Later that evening, as they walked home together, Clara finally allowed the walls around her heart to fall. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly. Alexander shook his head. "Yes, I did. Because love isn't about grand gestures. It's about being there even in the smallest moments." Clara's hand slipped into his. Ethan walked between them, holding both their hands, his smile wide as if he had known all along what they were only now beginning to see. And in that quiet, ordinary moment, walking down a simple street at sunset, they weren't just a single mom, a billionaire CEO, and a little boy anymore. They were something greater. A family, built not on wealth or rescue, but on strength, respect, and love. Moral of this story: love grows not when someone saves you, but when they walk beside you, valuing your strength as much as their own. True love comes when they walk beside you, respecting your strength and valuing who you are. Real commitment is found in the everyday moments, not the grand gestures, but the quiet choice to show up when it matters most. If this story inspired you, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the Gripping Life Tales channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another emotional love story. Share this with someone who believes that strength, love, and respect build the foundation of family. And tell me in the comments, do you think love is proven more in big sacrifices or in the small, everyday choices? And remember, we're not just telling stories. We're changing lives.